So, as a booktuber, sometimes you have to review, actually any critic, you have to review books that you hate. Oh boy, have I reviewed books that I've hated and been honest about it and got shit for it. But that's not where we're coming from. So I reviewed this book, I've talked about it before, and I feel like it should be held up as an example of how not to write a book. So this is Zenith, How Not to Write a Book. A car crash that was actually successful. So to give you the history of Zenith, it was written by two members of it, well, a member of our community, Sasha and Lindsay Cummings. Lindsay Cummings is a writer I have other than Zenith, I've never read any of her work. Her work's never been published in the UK, and I'm not going to go out of my way to import books. So Zenith, this is not an attack, this is nothing personal to them. This is purely based on the work, the disaster that was Zenith. Zenith suffers from many problems. As a writer, I read through it and I wanted to cringe. Two writers' voices that don't mesh. I don't know which parts were written by who, but there were very two distinct voices and I'm not sure whose voice was whose. It also lacked basic comprehension, basic understanding of how to write characters. On the most basic note, the characters were nothing more than shallow shells. They were empty one-note shells that had no development and no story. The endless point of view shifts did not help that. If you're going to jump from perspective of different characters, do it well, do it timely. They basically all felt the same with just some random quirk. The fact that the characters were contradictory. It felt like the characters contradicted what they were saying. Be it the character with PTSD, be it this, be it that. The contradiction of these characters, it didn't work. If your characters contradict what they're saying, or contradict their character arcs and everything that you are building, there is something fundamentally wrong. And I feel like I do put a lot of the blame on this book on the editor, because the editor's reputation is not particularly good. Zenith stands as a book, a science fiction book that was written by people whose only influence was Firefly, and obviously Marvel, and they didn't say it, but obviously Marvel comic book films. The Firefly influence is very strong. Zenith is a space opera. It's a Guardian of the Galaxy type space pirates kind of thing with an all-female crew. Its actual concept was very good. The concept of the book, I had so many good ideas and all of them fundamentally wasted by just a disaster. The other thing with the book is that reading it, you could definitely tell that the influences of the other writers were very strong. It had almost a fanficky thing. It had that vibe. That probably comes from where it was, originally it was going to be published serialized. So you end up with a lot of reintroduction of characters, lots of endless descriptions of the same characters every few chapters. But that works in a serialized novel, not in a novel, not in a big one book that you're going to read. Again, a lot of this lies with the editor and the publisher, because obviously I think it was published before it was ready. It feels like a second draft. It's the draft you send to your editor, and I know how publishing works, I have my own novel coming out. It's the draft you send to an editor before, and then come back, and then edit, and then come back, revise, edit. It's a constant back and forth. This is a second draft at best. The fact that the story doesn't go anywhere, the original storyline established stops very soon into the book. Then it's lots of filler, and then it picks up at the last 150 pages. The last few pages are actually very well written and very well done, and probably the best thing about the book, aside its cover. But the rest of the book is a lifeless mess. You can definitely tell the writers of this book, and this goes out to a lot of people. You see it in writers, you'll probably see it in my novel, you'll see the people that influence me. But when it feels so fanficky, I felt like I was reading, and I don't like Sarah J Maas at all, I think she's highly overrated. I felt like I was reading a Sarah J novel in space. There was no explanation, there was no context to anything. That was also another thing. Random words, random repetition of sentences and meanings. A character would think something and say something. It would repeat the same. It would be a repetition, and that's bad writing 101. Zenith fell flat because of that, but I also feel like there were so many good ideas in it And I wonder how much of the blame of Zenith lies in the publisher and the editor. A big booktuber like Sasha Alsberg, they see cash cow. If you are going to, and I don't get me wrong, I completely see people need to make money, but it's how it's executed and how it's done. This was rushed. This was obviously very rushed, and not much writer development happened. One of the things that I really struggled with was how messy the writing was. Now, this is just one of my bugbears as a writer. I like quite clean and concise writing. I like characters that you get and understand, but our characters were all over the place. They either shifted personalities, or they contradicted their own personality or their own setup, or had no setup, and that was the thing that really was bizarre. The universe the characters inhabit is also very poorly executed. Pretty much every place they went felt the same. There was no variation. It was poorly executed, and it was poorly built. The world building in this was not a good thing. When you build a world, when you build a universe as complex as this, you have everything to explore when you're making your own science fiction universe. But they didn't. Everything felt the same, every planet, every world. It also felt like it was very forced and very fast. The original part of the book was obviously published in the short preview. You could tell had so much work done to it and was probably the best well-written section of the book. The rest of it was obviously rushed. They obviously had deadlines, and it shows. It's one of those books that has so many good ideas, so many good concepts, but they're also poorly executed. Sadly, you can read Zenith and go, this is how not to write a novel, and that shows. When I read it, that's actually made me feel quite sad, because it was poorly executed. It was not well done, but it had so many good ideas that were either not utilised, underdeveloped, or just left in first draft phase. When it comes down to it, you have a novel that's going to get a sequel because it made a lot of money, not because it's a fantastic book.